You don't even have to drive somewhere to hear a false shepherd. You can just get him or her on your own phone or device. You've got an internet connection. Yes, you can hear the Bible online. Yes, you can hear a good Bible preacher, but you can also hear a thousand false voices. We spent a couple of weeks looking at Psalm 23, seeing Jesus Christ there, and I felt that in the weeks leading up to Easter, it might be good to continue that shepherd theme, because it's not as though that once you've looked at Psalm 23, the idea of God as shepherd is over. There are many places where we have that truth of God as our shepherd. You would have seen it in Ezekiel 34 that was read before John chapter 10. I read those deliberately to see that Christ is the ultimate shepherd of his sheep. He is the ultimate shepherd of believing Israel, and he is the shepherd of his bride, the church. In the reading today of John 10, I want us this morning to look at the first 10 verses, and then the next couple of Sundays to look at most of the rest of John chapter 10. But you would have noticed in the reading that there are these contrasts. Because if there is a true shepherd of God's people, which there is, then there must be some false shepherds too. Where there's truth, there is error. Where there is authentic, there is what is fake. My mother spent really virtually all of her working life at the Reserve Bank, the top of Martin Place in Sydney. And over those years of working there, she came into contact with real Aussie dollars, whether coins or notes. And certainly those notes took on different colours and different materials. But if you spend enough time with the real currency, you can just sort of spot what is fake and what is fraudulent, and above all, what is worthless. And so with God as the true shepherd, there must be some false alternatives. Think about the New Testament speaks of Antichrist. John tells his readers in 1 John that even now there are many antichrists. And so when we read the word anti, we tend to think of against or antagonistic. But really the term anti has the idea of an alternative. Another Christ. Another Jesus. No, I'm the real Jesus. I'm the real one. I'm the real Messiah. I'm your solution to your sin problem. I'm the solution to your alienation from God. Even today, there are many false shepherds. It was true in Bible times. It was true in the Old Testament times. And it was also true in Jesus' day and in our day as well. There are other scriptures that deal with the problem of false shepherds as Jesus dealt with that in John chapter 10. There was a greater context. Whether Ezekiel 34 or other place. Let me just read a couple of verses from Isaiah 56. The prophet says, his watchmen, God's watchmen, are blind. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb dogs. Now, some dogs, very observant, very with it. Other dogs, not a lot of clue. Yeah? Dumb dogs. They cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Yes, they are greedy dogs, which never have enough. And they are shepherds, Isaiah says, who cannot understand. They all look to their own way, everyone for their own gain, from his own territory. A scathing denunciation of the false shepherds. In Jeremiah 50, verse 6, my people have been lost sheep. Their shepherds have led them astray. They have turned them away on the mountains. They have gone from mountain to hill. They have forgotten their resting place. So in Old Testament days, there were false shepherds. And I imagine they had the same kind of message that false teachers have today. And it's this: you can come to God any way you like. No, you don't have to come to Jerusalem where the temple is. You can go to the high places. You can worship conveniently. In fact, you can worship Baal and other gods, but if in your own heart you're really acknowledging the true God, that's fine as well. You can worship God at your own convenience according to your own values. False shepherds. Or maybe this sort of false shepherd. I know the Ten Commandments are very, very severe, but do you notice that people break the Ten Commandments, but God doesn't judge them immediately? This means that God's not going to judge you at all. You can happily go on living your own life and you won't be judged at all. God is gracious and kind and loving. That's the voice of the false shepherd. And we have those same kinds of shepherds today. They preach another message, another Jesus, and another way of salvation. And it is everywhere. It's everywhere. You don't even have to drive somewhere to hear a false shepherd. You can just get him or her on your own phone or device. You've got an internet connection. Yes, you can hear the Bible online. Yes, you can hear a good Bible preacher, but you can also hear a thousand false voices, the false shepherds. And so you have this context of the Bible, the Old Testament, particularly of these false shepherds. But there's also a more immediate context in the Gospel of John. Because in John chapter 9, Jesus does a wonderful miracle. He heals a man who had been born blind. It was a tremendous miracle. Tremendous miracle. Well, the disciples didn't understand it. They thought either he had sinned or his parents had sinned. And the Pharisees, the religious leaders, hated the miracle. They hated the miracle. Look at verse 28 of John 9. These Pharisees reviled this man and they said, "You are his disciple, Jesus, but we are Moses' disciple. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from." The man answered and said to them, "This is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshipper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." Now notice the response of the Pharisees in verse 34. They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us?" And notice this, they cast him out. We might say they booted him out. "We're done with you. You cannot worship here anymore. You're gone, done." False shepherds casting out the flock. Look at what Jesus does in verse 35. When Jesus heard that they had cast him out, look at this, "and when he had found him." Why? Because he's the good shepherd. He goes after his sheep. The false shepherds drive away the sheep. The good shepherd, Jesus Christ, says to him in verse 35, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And of course the man says, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" "I want to. I just want to see him." And of course he sees Jesus Christ. And so there's this immediate context to John 10 of the false shepherds, these Pharisees, that drive people away from God. Jesus is the true shepherd who shows us how we can get to God. Look at verse 1 of John 10. "Most assuredly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. He who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep." This enclosure was usually made of rocks. And there would be an opening for a door where the shepherd would often lie across. And you know, shepherds in Bible times, they knew how to economize. So you could have an enclosure of a few hundred sheep belonging to 5 or 6 shepherds. 5 or 6 shepherds. And so you'd take them in at night, and come morning, shepherds would come one at a time, and they would call out their sheep from the door. And each sheep would follow their shepherd. They'd economise. Why have 5 enclosures? Just have one. Just have one. Cheaper that way. Well, the only one that's going to come over the rocks, over the back way, is going to be a thief and a robber. Look at verse 3. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice. It's very important, verse 3. They hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and leads them out. They had a name for all of their sheep. And look at verse 4. And when he brings them out, his own sheep, he goes before them, he leads them, and the sheep follow them. Look at verse 4. For they know his voice. Second time, the voice of the shepherd. Verse 5, yet they'll by no means follow a stranger, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. 3 times it's about the voice of the shepherd. Twice, the true, authentic voice of Jesus. The 3rd time, the false voice of the thieves and the robbers. False shepherd. Some of you know that Philip Keller wrote a famous little book, A Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. He was a shepherd, I believe, in Africa. And he talks about the relationship between sheep and not just their shepherd, but the shepherd's voice. He said the relationship which rapidly develops between a shepherd and the sheep under his care is to a definite degree dependent on the use of the shepherd's voice. She quickly became accustomed to their owner's particular voice with its unique tone. They can distinguish it from that of any other person. And sometimes you'd have people come in and they'd even dress up as the shepherd. They'd wear a shepherd's clothing and they'd call out to the sheep, but you know what? Wrong voice. They had the wrong voice. It was the wrong shepherd. Keller said even if the visitor would use the same words and phrases as that of the rightful owner, they wouldn't react in the same way because it wasn't the shepherd's voice. And Jesus connects a true shepherd and his sheep, and the sheep respond to the shepherd's voice. It's true when it comes to the natural realm of sheep and shepherds in the farming realm. It's true in the spiritual realm. It's the same thing. Why? Because in 1 John 4:6, let me read you this verse, where John, the same writer of Gospel of John, says, 1 John 4:6, we're of God. He who knows God hears us. Oh, you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to listen to the apostles. He who is not of God does not hear us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. God's true children hear the shepherd's voice. They respond to the shepherd's words. They listen and they love and they submit to the shepherd's book. If they're not hearing the shepherd's voice, they're not responding to the shepherd's voice. Is it a sheep or a goat? What are we dealing with? Jesus says quite emphatically that the sheep hear the voice of the true shepherd. Now that's very clear. It's very clear, these verses, but look at what happens in verse 6. Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to them. All right? He teaches and it gets nowhere. It gets nowhere. Have you ever, whether you've tried to teach someone in a classroom setting, in your family, whoever it is, and you teach something which straightforward and clear, but not understood. That Jesus had the same problem. He had the same problem. People dull of hearing, some blinded by their own unbelief, some hardened by God himself. Well, Jesus just lays it all on the line. Look at verse 7. Jesus said to them again, he says, okay, most assuredly, you might have verily, verily. Okay, I'm going to say this again, and I really want you to listen. I am the door of the sheep. This should make it easier for you to understand. I'm the door of the sheep. All whoever came before me are, present tense. There were good prophets in Israel. There were good prophets. There were a lot of bad ones. There were some bad teachers as early as, late as John 9. Jesus had been battling them throughout his ministry. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. The sheep resisted the false voices. When someone comes to Jesus Christ and they're born again by God's Spirit, they should have a very sensitive spiritual antenna to the gospel. And when they're given a perverted message, or when they're presented with an alternative Jesus, their spiritual antennas should be on high alert. On high alert. Look at what he says in verse 9. I am the door. Emphatically. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and he will go in and out and find pasture. Have you ever moved from a really little house, really little place, and you move into a larger place, and it's like, there's so many doors here, and so many things to lock. When you want to leave the house, you've got to lock this fly screen and this back door, and close this door and that door, and you want to keep the heat in or the cool out, that sort of thing. When you've got a larger sort of house, the doors. There's lots of doors. You're going to overlook them at some point. Well, there's just one door we're going to focus on today. Just one. Jesus Christ. He says, I am that one door. And he says, if anyone enters by me, have you done that today? Have you entered to the Father through Jesus Christ? Not through your own works, but through his work at Calvary. Look at what happens if we go through him. Jesus says in verse 9, he'll be saved, and he's going to go in and out and find pasture. The picture is a sheep with other sheep. They're safe, and they're fed, and they're free, and they know where to sleep at night. They know where they're going to sleep every night. They have true liberty. You're a sheep that's snatched by a thief or robber. You're going to get abused, mistreated, probably slaughtered in a few days' time. You're nothing. You come through the door. There's life and liberty and safety and blessing. I read a story of a man by the name of Sir George Adam Smith. This is going back many, many decades now. He was a noted Bible teacher. And he was travelling across the Middle East. It wasn't the Holy Lands, I don't believe, but it was in the Middle East. Don't know which country. And he came across a shepherd and his sheep. And this Middle Eastern shepherd showed him a fold into which the sheep were led to at night. 4 walls. There were just 4 walls. And Sir George said, this is where they go at night. He said, yes, when they are there, they are perfectly safe. But there is no door, asked George Smith. The shepherd said, I am the door. Now he was an Arab, he wasn't Jewish, not a Christian, not speaking the language of the New Testament. But Sir George looked at him again and said, what do you mean by the door? What do you mean by that? The shepherd said, well, look, when the light has gone and all the sheep are inside, I lie in the open space. and no sheep ever goes out but across my body, and no wolf comes in unless he crosses my body. I am the door. That's what Jesus has in mind. When a wolf comes near us, he has to deal with Jesus Christ. That's why we'll find it, as John 10 continues, that a true sheep is forever belonging to the Good Shepherd. A true sheep will always belong to Jesus Christ. If Satan could steal us, he would, wouldn't he? He doesn't want anyone to go to heaven. Satan doesn't want God to receive any glory from sinners coming to him. If Satan could steal us, he would. He would. And then look at verse 10, please. Look at verse 10. It says, the thief does not come. I believe this is a reference to Satan. He is the ultimate false shepherd. The thief doesn't come except to do three things. He's going to steal, and he's going to kill, and he is going to destroy. Now, it never seems like that. Never seems like that. But that's the ultimate destination for those who are seduced by the God of this world. It's the broad way. And Jesus said it leads to destruction. There's been a few occasions when I think I've met people that were either possessed by demons or certainly troubled by demons, and in every case, they looked like they were dying. You could see it in their eyes, the torment, in their face, in their bodies. These people look like death warmed over. That's what Satan does when people give him very direct exposure through the spirit realm and through demonism and through the doorway of illicit drugs. They open their mind and spirits to all the confusion and destruction that Satan can wreak upon a life. Satan steals, kills, destroys. He's the ultimate phony. He runs the ultimate spiritual scam of the universe. Promising heaven, he gives hell. Promising life, he gives death. Promising peace, he gives guilt. If you reject God's way, there is death and destruction. But then Jesus says, listen, I'm different. I'm a different kind of shepherd. He said, I've come that they may have life. Jesus lays down his life and then he gives us his resurrected life. That's how he does it. He dies for our sins on the cross, and then he gives us his resurrection life, to have it more abundantly. Paul in Romans 8:6 says, to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. This abundant life is not without its difficulties. It's not without its trials. In the language of Psalm 23, there are some valleys and green pastures. But on the way, we have the care of the shepherd. On the way, we have a safe place to sleep every night. We have the shepherd there at the door. He is the door, protecting us now and into eternity. Our Lord truly is the good shepherd of the sheep.